Jacob was living in the land of Canaan as a sojourner. His sons were looking after the livestock. Jacob had spent a lot of time with his son Joseph and trained him in the ways of the Lord, and they loved each other dearly. But the brothers were jealous, and they took out their jealousy by selling Joseph as a slave to Egypt, and reporting back to their father, implying that a wild animal had destroyed Joseph. Jacob was distraught and refused to be comforted. But this all put the brothers on a course of action where they were out of fellowship with their father, for they could not tell him what they had done, and with their God. So, although they were in name followers of God, yet their life was out of fellowship with God. And Genesis 38 shows us just how far away they moved from the way of God. It had been Judah who had proposed not killing Joseph, but selling him for money. And so he is the de facto leader of the brothers. We'll read the first part of Genesis 38. It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua, and he married her and went in to her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. And she conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah. He was at Chezib when she bore him. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. And Judah said to Onan, Go in to your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up an heir to your brother. But Onan knew that the heir would not be his, and it came to pass, when he went in to his brother's wife, that he omitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord. Therefore the Lord killed him also. Then Judah said to Tamar his daughter-in-law, Remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown. For he said, Lest he also die as his brothers did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Now in the process of time the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted, and went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her by the way, and said, Please, let me come in to you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, What will you give me, that you may come in to me? And he said, I will send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, Will you give me a pledge till you send it? Then he said, What pledge shall I give you? So she said, Your signet and cord, and your staff that is in your hand. Then he gave them to her, and went in to her, and she conceived by him. So she arose and went away, and laid aside her veil, and put on the garments of her widowhood. We'll read the conclusion of the matter next time. So Judah is the de facto leader. Reuben was the oldest, but he is seen as a weak leader. What Judah does, this story began before Joseph was sold, was that he had left his brothers. He'd gone out by himself. He'd made a friend with a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. And so as he worked with him, he came across a Canaanite woman the daughter of Shua, and he got married to her. He obviously knew the story that his father had been sent back to his mother's family to take a wife because they were worshippers of God. But the Canaanites were not worshipping the living God. Yet Judah made friends with the Canaanites and married a Canaanite girl. And so we see that working through in the experience of this Canaanite woman's children. They marry, they have a son, and another son, Onan, and a third son, Shelah. And in the course of time, Judah takes a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But takes a course of wickedness in his life. The Lord is displeased and takes his life. Now, the practice of the time was that the inheritance should flow to the oldest son. And if the son died childless, a younger brother would marry the widow to produce a son for his older brother. In this way, the widow was provided for by her husband's family. The whole story of Ruth is based on this tradition, this approach, that a relative can stand in to raise up children where there is no heir. Since the Lord had killed Judah sent Onan in to marry his brother's wife and raise an heir for his brother. But Onan did not accept this tradition that they had, and so he refused to father a child to his brother's wife. This attitude that he had displeased the Lord, and so the Lord brought judgment on him as well, and he died. The youngest brother, Shelah, was evidently a little bit too young to marry, and so Judah says to his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house, till my son Shelah is grown." So he intends, maybe, to give Shelah to Tamar. But he's a bit reluctant, because he's thinking maybe he will die as his brothers have died. So he sent Tamar back to her father's house. Now Judah's wife dies. So Judah is facing a lot of death. And this has all come about because of the sin that has taken place and that is not repented of. And he is not walking in fellowship with God. And so things go wrong. And that's what happens in a life that is walked outside of fellowship with God. Yes, there are difficulties for those who walk with God, but it's always worth asking the question when something goes seriously wrong, am I walking properly with the Lord? Is he trying to get my attention? But Judah has experienced 3 deaths now, his wife and 2 of his sons, over a short period of time. But Judah got over it. And at shearing time he went to his friend Hira the Adullamite to help him with the shearing. Now Tamar was told that he was there. She disguised herself and sat in a public place as if she was a harlot. For indeed many women have been forced into harlotry to make a living because their families have not looked after them. And Judah, since he was not walking with the Lord, and was single again, his wife having died, took the opportunity and went to her. "Can I come in to you?" "What price?" "A goat." "Okay, but will you give me a token, a pledge?" "What do you want?" "Well, let me have your signet, and cord, and your staff." So he gave them to her, and went in, and she conceived by her father-in-law, although Judah never recognized her. This is a pretty shocking situation to arise, but it's come about because there is sin that has not been repented of, and one sin leads to another.